Happy Thursday after Labor Day. Is that a thing? Is that a holiday? We were just talking, Katie and I were just talking about this week in general. It's just kind of a weird week. You know, like people have Monday off and it's a 4-day week, and then people recognize it's kind of the last blowout of the summer season, and everything is just a little low-key, loosey-goosey, relaxed. And then too, I think in a lot of parts of the country, like here, kids are just starting back to school. So if people have kids in school, they're wound up, they're busy with that. So I don't know, it's just a weird, it's an interesting time of year. Specifically, we were talking about the live streams and just kind of viewership on the live streams. And certainly November, December, January, hundreds of viewers, lots and lots and lots and lots and lots and more questions than I can possibly answer. And in the summer, it just kind of backs off a little bit. So today is your day. I mean, I'll look again at my iPad in a second, but if you've got a question, today is the day to ask it, because there currently are not questions queued up on the chat roll. A couple business things before we get going. As always, thanks to Typon for underwriting this and keeping this free for you. I just saw Typon at IWF at the big show down in Atlanta. And as always, what a comprehensive glue company. It's just, they have something in every category of adhesive. It's really amazing. I'll talk more about IWF in a second. And then the other thing is Labor Day just happened. So that means October and Halloween are not far behind. We've got a project plan for a pumpkin tray. That's a very cute little project. You're going to want to have a couple of these on your table when you have people over around Halloween. So that is available as a download, and have a look at that. There's a banner just right there on the screen. Scroll down to that, click that, and you can get that download so that you too can have a pumpkin for Halloween, a wooden pumpkin. Jumping in here to start, one of the things I want to talk about, and this is a question that we get so often, is about blade selection for a table saw. So go ahead and feed your questions in on whatever topic you have. I'm going to take a second and talk about table saw blade selection, and then I'll get to my iPad and look for your preguntas, look for your questions. Depending on when you jumped into woodworking, in my case, lots of years ago, the go-to blade, the do-all blade for a table saw was a combination blade. And I'm going to zoom you in here with the camera so you can get a better look at what I'm talking about. So combination blade historically was a 50-tooth blade, and combination meaning you can rip with this and you can cross cut with this. And we're about to talk about attributes of both of those blades, but both of those blades are here. Big gullets here for ripping, little gullets there for cross cutting. These blades don't get used that much anymore. And I'm going to talk about today's combination blade alternative in a second. But that, again, depending on how long you've been in woodworking, you might have seen these as the all-purpose blade. Let's go to specialized blades. So ripping, when you cut with the grain, this is a ripping blade. They typically have between 24 and 40 teeth around the rim on a 10-inch diameter blade. If you get to a table saw that's larger, there are 12-inch and 14-inch table saws, that tooth count is going to change. But 10-inch is very, very common. On a 10-inch blade, 24 to 40 teeth around the rim. And again, these gullets, the valleys between the teeth, are very large. And I'm going to come back to that concept in a second. Crosscut blade typically has 60 or 80 teeth on the rim. Crosscut blade would be used for cutting across the grain, perpendicular to the grain. And also I use this on sheet stock. So if I'm cutting plywood, melamine, particle board, I use the crosscut blade to get finer cut quality on it. And then additionally, if we're using a veneered material, like I'd say an oak veneered plywood, if we cut it with a fine tooth blade like this, we're way less likely to get chipping and splintering in the in the face of the material. Now, small teeth versus big teeth. So with a crosscut blade, I just said, part of the reason we use this is to get good cut quality. So a great question would be, why not just use this all the time? And the answer lies in the way material handles when you cut it. So I just grabbed a piece of red oak, and if I take a pocket knife and I go across the grain with red oak, I get these tiny little shavings. Really what I'm making here is sawdust. That's a crosscut. If I go this way, then I get these big curls, I get these big shavings. That simulates a rip cut. The reason that we need big gullets on a rip blade is because we get those big shavings. And that gullet, that valley's job is to carry those out of the cut. If you try to rip, and if you've experienced this, here's what happened. If you try to rip with a fine tooth blade with small gullets, it tends to heat up really, really fast. And the reason is those gullets aren't large enough to carry those big chips out of the cut. Today's combo blade looks like this. This is a 40 tooth blade. So remember, this was the top end of a rip, 24 to 40 teeth. So very common tooth pattern with this is 40 teeth, alternate top bevel. Alternate top bevel means if you looked at this really, really close, end on, tooth to the left, tooth to the right, tooth to the left, tooth to the right, alternating direction. So that's what that alternate top bevel means. So for me, if I obviously own a bunch of blades. If I'm doing lots and lots of cutting, if I'm cutting miles of material for if I'm doing cross cuts or any kind of sheet stock, then I'll put a crosscut blade in. Just on a daily wear, daily use kind of a thing, it's the 40 tooth that lives in my saw most of the time. And then I only take this out and swap if I have some specialized cut, like I just talked about, lots and lots of ripping, that guy, lots and lots of cross cutting or sheet goods, I would use that guy. And now back to our regularly scheduled programming. All right, what you got? Let's look and see. So IWF in Atlanta, where I recently was, International Woodworking Fair, man, great show. And it's really nice to see, that show is every 2 years. 2 years ago it was canceled because of COVID. It's really nice to see the show back and ramping up again. Attendance was good. Vendor attendance was also good. Okie doke. David says, do you have any experience with saw blade cleaning systems? Thoughts? So I don't know about a system. I'm not familiar with a system, but saw blade cleaning products like CMTs is called, it's either 2020 or 2050. It's a liquid in a spritz bottle. I know people use stuff as accessible as Simple Green to clean their blades. I do know cleaning blades, router bits is hugely important. Heat and carbide are not good friends. And if you leave resin, if you leave buildup on a blade or on a router bit, you can get excessive heat, and that's going to cause your carbide to break down more quickly. So keeping it clean is really, really important. But I don't know what you mean by systems. I've not ever seen anything automated. For me, as a rule, I lay a blade on a piece of scrap plywood or something, and I spritz both faces, and then I just let it sit until that schmutz loosens up. Then I go back and wipe it off. When using a router, Kevin asks, either by hand or in a router table, why don't you use a dead man's foot switch? Keep your hands out of the way, makes routing much safer. Your comments, please. So I would beg to differ. So first off, dead man's foot switch, what that means is you might already be familiar with a foot switch. People who use a scroll saw will use it so they can position their wood, especially on a pierce cut, and they can be holding it in place. And then by stepping on a pedal, that turns the saw on and then it rocks. So I'm going to talk about two different, that's a rocker switch. When I rock it this way, it's on. When I rock it this way, it's off. Something like a scroll saw, that works great. Some people, I used to have a rocker style foot switch connected to the dust collector on my table saw. So when I turned on my table saw, I could step on that rocker, dust collector would run, step on the other side, dust collector would stop. With the dead man switch, you have to maintain contact with it. So when you step on it, the thing would run. When you release your foot, it would automatically come to a stop. So my I beg to differ would be in the safe world of making it safer. Anything that's on the floor that has the opportunity to activate a tool is a bad idea because you walk on the floor. And if you step on that, if you drop something on it, if you, I don't know, think of the many scenarios in an active shop environment where something could hit that switch and turn on the thing, in this case, the router. So instead, my preferred method is if I'm router shopping, then lots of routers, and I'm going to see if the one I'm thinking of is right here. Lots of routers these days have a switch in the handle. And I think, in fact, this is on new stuff, this has been mandated. So holding the router, I squeeze that trigger, router runs, release. I mean, it's basically a dead man switch in my fingers. So when I'm router shopping, that's my preferred style. I want the switch here in the handle, not on the motor. In a router table, my solution for that is I put a switch on the router table. And when I turn that switch on, the router runs. When I turn it off, obviously the router stops. There's a plug in the back of it. So when I'm changing bits in the router, I unplug the router from the switch. And then when I'm ready to go, I plug that router in. When I'm ready to cut, I can turn it on. That's the best scenario for a router table. Companies make router table specific switches. Craig, who makes a router table, and of course the Craig jig, they sell a switch that has two plugs on the back, so you can drive your router and your shop vacuum at the same time with that one switch. That's the best way to go. I would never put a dead man on a power tool. And the exception to that, where a foot switch would be okay, would be something like a scroll saw. Eric asks, is there a best way to cut tapers for table or chair legs without spending hundreds of dollars on jigs? So, yeah, so Katie, if you want to take a second and look, I'm pretty confident that we have a video on tapered legs on the table saw, making tapered legs on the table saw. And we've got that represented. I know I've done it a couple different ways, and where it gets foggy for me is, did I do this on a DVD? Did I do it on a streaming video? Or did I do it on a short form web clip that's on the site? So you can cut tapers on legs using a jointer. No tools, no jig required. It's a procedure that you follow on the jointer. You can also cut them on a bandsaw, no jig required. On a bandsaw, you do it by laying out the taper, and then you follow that line, you cut it, then you take that cut to the jointer and you joint the taper in order to clean it up. You can also cut tapers on a table saw with a very simple shop-made jig. So if Katie can find it, she'll put it in the comments. I know we've done it where we've got tapers on two sides on legs, and we've also got tapers on four sides on legs. And again, I'm just not 100% sure which format that content appears in, but I know I've covered it. But the short answer is yes, very simple. It's hanging right here, so let me just show you the jig. With this shop-made jig, that's a taper jig. Leg goes in here, this edge goes against the fence. You feed this whole thing. Because this guide is set at an angle, that's the angle of the taper, then you're going to take less material off on this end more material off on that end. General rule of thumb, if you're looking for the info, is that the foot at the bottom should be half as big as the leg. This is set up for 1.5 by 1.5 leg stock, so it results in a 3/4 inch foot on this end. That being said, when you cut it, it cuts it a 1/16 oversize, so that leg can go to the jointer to get the taper cleaned up, and that removes a 1/16 in order to take it down to its final size. But yeah, there's like no money in that except for the toggle clamp, because it's all scrap wood. Okie doke. Uncle 60 from YouTube says, you ever done a French polish type of finish? No, I have zero experience with that. The closest I can come to that is on a guitar I made. I did a multi-coat, and when I say multi-coat, I mean multi-coat lacquer buildup. I'm pretty sure it was 12 coats. And then I buffed that to you could see your face in that finish when it was done, but that's not the same as a French polish. But no, I've never actually done French polish. Brian asks, is a C channel necessary for a tabletop when not using a breadboard? And then if it is or isn't, how does the table thickness relate to whether or not the table will stay flat? So a couple of things. We actually get this question quite a bit about preventing warping, cupping, or overcome warping and cupping later. You know, something went south, a glue up did cup. And the answer to that really is all about the material and a couple things. The material needs to be dried and dried correctly. So regardless of how thick a chunk is, 4/4, 6/4, 8/4, 12/4, if it's not dried correctly, then it's very easy to get internal stress on a chunk of wood. So that's part of it, is that drying process needs to happen right. And that's about mostly it's about not trying to dry the wood too fast, because that's what typically causes the most issues. Thicker the wood, the more difficult it is to get that drying process right. Then machining the wood, we've got a video on this. The best way to machine a any piece is to work toward the center. So plane of face, flip it, plane of face, flip it, plane of face, flip it, plane of face. So when you're done, if you started at 4/4 and you ended at 3/4, you took 1/8 off each face. And what you're doing there is you're hedging your bet. By removing the same amount of material from both faces, you're encouraging that piece to remain flat, and you're not increasing, or you're not introducing some kind of tension by taking more off one face than the other. And then from there, before somebody asks, I will address the growth ring concept of when I do a glue up, should I alternate growth rings, annual rings down, annual rings up, annual rings down, annual rings up? I never do. My friend Paul, who does lots and lots of woodworking, never does. I've done bazillions of tabletops where I'm looking for the best face grain, the best color match. That's how I glue it up, regardless of end grain. That's all predicated on the material was stable, it was planed correctly. Additionally, it acclimated to your shop environment before you did any work with it. So the concept with putting something, a breadboard and a rail on a table, a C channel, shouldn't be, I must do this to keep this flat. That slab should be perfectly capable of staying flat without introducing any other forms of support. Where you might choose to do that would be, it's really, really big, and all I'm going to do, you know, it's a 32-inch wide tabletop, and all I'm going to do is a hairpin leg on this corner and a hairpin leg on this corner, and if big old Uncle Bob sits in the middle, is the table going to crack? So that kind of support, meaning I need to add some rigidity to it so it can take a load, that's a reason for adding a C channel. But it shouldn't be about trying to prevent warp. I really went on and on. Did I answer the question? Yeah, so then thickness, same. Whether you're doing a 3/4 inch thick glue up or an 1.5 inch thick glue up, all of that applies. Is there one plane that every woodworker should own? Which one type would you recommend? 747, so that you can go wherever you want to go to all the woodworking events. Um, I'm not a great asker for this or answerer for this because I'm not a huge hand tool guy. I can tell you, for me, um, my go-to plane, this like, so my qualifier is I don't hand plane edges. I don't hand plane faces. I don't, but what I do is I often am cleaning up end grain, perhaps where I did a finger joint and the parts bypass each other like they should. And I want to clean up the end grain to flush it to the face grain. I want to knock a corner off a board. I want to create a chamfer and I'm going to do it by hand instead of taking out a router because I'm only doing one chamfer. So this, a low angle block plane, is my plane of choice for that. And more specifically, this is a Lee Nielsen low angle block plane. And then before people ask, let me get it in the right light. This has come up before. I had this engraved. So when it came from Lee Nielsen, it didn't look like this. I had that done by Jenny Bauer, did a little article on it. The article is called Not a Plain Plane. I love this plane so much. I sent it to Jenny to have it made even cooler like that. So a low angle block plane would be my, I think you got to have one of these. But if you talk to other woodworkers, you're going to get other answers for that. Ryan asks, tips on routing inlays. I've made a few now using an inlay kit with guide bushing and find the inlay itself is pretty tight, therefore requires a lot of sanding on the edges to get it to fit. It ends up looking great, but I spend more time sanding than cutting, and more time sanding than cutting out the insert and inlay. Yeah, so ironically, hold please. I did this today, and I'll tell you why before we're done here. That's a lace wood bow tie in a birch cookie. And if you're not familiar with the concept we're talking about here, the way it works is that you can get a variety of acrylic templates. And then with a plunge router, the guide bushing that we put in the plunge router is a special guide bushing just for this process. It's got a collar that goes on it. It's not currently on this one. It's been removed. It's in my toolbox. So we do some of the work with the collar on, some of the work you cut the inlay with the collar off, and that results in a pocket and then an inlay that fits into that pocket. So in my experience with this, what I would do is fault could lie in a couple areas. The tolerances on that guide bushing have to be right. The tolerances on your router bit have to be right. This uses an 1/8 inch upcut spiral router bit. I've never had that small a bit sharpened. I just replace them. But if you've ever had the bit sharpened, that would throw off your cuts because you're reducing the diameter of the bit when you get it sharpened. I've done a lot of this work with the Rockler kit and also with Slab Stitcher, SLAB Stitcher. And with both of those kits, cut the pocket, cut the inlay, put them together, done. No sanding. My fear with sanding would be if I have a nice straight edge on a bow tie that I distort that and I introduce a gap of some kind, and that would be very bad. So in this case, that lacewood bow tie just went right into that pocket. So there's something, somewhere in your system, something is amiss. It really can't be the pattern because this hole is this hole. And what happens, again, if you're not familiar with this, you use this same pattern to cut the positive and the negative, to cut the pocket and the inlay. So really the only place that you can be introducing a variable is with the guide bushing or with the router bit. You do want to be very careful to make sure that the router bit is centered in the guide bushing, because that can, especially if if you start cutting this way and then you turn the router as you're working your way around the whole pattern, that could mess you up if you're off center, because it's going to change your relative position to the template. So I would check that. But if you do all that and it's right, I would check. I would maybe just replace the guide bushing and the router bit and see. They're not horribly expensive, and that's what I would try next. Steve asks, on a wood strip canoe, should I pre-coat the exterior with a coat of epoxy resin and let it dry before applying fiberglass cloth? So my first, your mileage may vary. Part of this answer is I am working on a cedar strip canoe. This is my first ever cedar strip canoe. I am getting lots and lots and lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of help along the way. I am not an expert on this. So the product I'm using is Total Boat High Performance Epoxy. The way it worked on my canoe is we got the whole outside. I haven't done the inside yet. We got the whole outside wet with epoxy. Then the fiberglass. Now I'll take that back. I got to think a second. It was a while ago. We draped the fiberglass onto a dry cedared canoe. So the cedar had been sanded. It had been wiped down with denatured alcohol to make sure there was no dust left on it. We draped the fiberglass on it. Then we introduced the epoxy over the fiberglass, and that's how you join them. You're basically gluing the fiberglass to the hull, to the wood. And I think the key at that point is you need porosity in the wood in order to get everything to stick together. I know that as we did subsequent coats, and don't hold me to how many coats we did, I think we did 4. Just like always working with epoxy, there's a window of opportunity where to get those coats to bond, you put the first coat on, it gets to a point where it's like kind of dry, but not dry. It's not fully cured. Then it's time to do a second coat. Same with the second coat, and the first one happens fast because it soaks into the wood so much. Then you do a second coat, then you do a third coat. But part of the key to that, and it's like having the wood raw when you start, is that in order for one layer to grab into the previous layer, it's got to still have some tack to it. Same with the wood. I'm pretty sure, and Total Boat would be a great one to ask for this to get confirmation. But I'm pretty sure you've got to have raw wood to get that fiberglass mat to bond. My college roommate, who went on to teach tech ed in a middle school for 30 some years, subsequently retired and went to boat school. So lucky me, he's been basically my personal consultant on the canoe. And in fact, when I fiberglassed the outside, he came and helped, and he will come back and help too. And the inside's even harder to do than the outside, and he's going to come back and help with that. Dennis says, hello from West Virginia. Paul, how do you get dried glue off clamps? So on the clamp bar, I generally just do a very rapid move of one end of the clamp across that bar. And sometimes it takes a little persuasion, so if there's glue on here and this isn't wanting to travel, then sometimes doing that until it goes all the way down, and wood glue won't stick to metal. So, I mean, it sticks in an irritating way where it prevents that from moving. How's that for an irritating sound? So keep doing it, right? So it'll stick enough that especially on this clamp, there are little teeth there. that gives that jaw the opportunity to bite. It'll build up in there if it has a chance, but it doesn't want, because this is not porous, it doesn't want to stay bonded. So if you do a rapid move across there, it'll knock off. Eddie says, what's your opinion on pros and cons of dial a Dado versus a Dado stack set? So if you're not familiar with it, dial a Dado is a dado head from Freud, where on the outside of the last rim blade, there's a dial, a knob. And when you turn that, it moves that last rim blade left to right. So we've built up the whole stack. Rim blade, chipper, 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 rim blade. And now I don't want it to be 3/4. I want it to be a little over 3/4 or under 3/4. Instead of removing or introducing a shim, you turn that knob and it moves that outer blade. So then once you lock it in, then you're locked in. So question, what do I think of it? I think it's great. I think it's a cool idea. In the absence of that, what you're doing is rim blade, chipper, 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 shim, rim blade, test cut. If it's not right, take the rim blade off, take the shim out, do a different shim, put the rim blade back on, rinse and repeat. You're going to do that over and over again until you get it right. So it's a little more accessible. The dial-a-width dado is more accessible because I loosen the nut, I loosen the arbor nut, I turn that knob, and I might be missing a step here. It's quite a while since I used one. But it saves you from messing around with shims. It's a cool idea. Brian asks, do you use wood grain filler? If so, is there a go-to one for you? Yeah, so I'm coming back. I'm coming back, still coming back. This is my grain filler of choice. Aqua Coat is the brand. Try to get the glare off of it there. This one is their clear. So they make a couple of these. The clear is what I would use under a clear top coat. And this is with it because what one does, it's very, very simple to use. It's about the consistency of Vaseline, petroleum jelly. So you get a little of that on your squeegee, you work it in across the grain, you squeegee back off excess by going with the grain, and then give it, I think it's maybe 20 or 30 minutes dry time, very light sanding, and then if you need to, you do it again. The other version of this, there's a version of this that is white, I think, pretty sure it's white, and I would use that if I'm doing a paint grade project. It's got a little bit more body to it. So if you're interested in this, here's another thing the link you could throw in here, Katie, if you can find it. So I'm finishing a camper remodel. And as part of the camper remodel, which is not showing up here on WWGOA, but I'll tell you where, as part of the camper remodel, I repainted the galley cabinets, the kitchen cabinets. And they had a finish on them, and then I was going to paint over that. So I scuffed them lightly. I used the paint grade filler from Aqua Coat, and then I painted over the top of everything. So Katie and the RV Repair Club, camper upgrade, it's probably video number 20 or so. It's just called Painting Kitchen Cabinets. And if you can find that and put the link in here, that would be cool. So that Aqua Coat, that's my grain filler of choice. And then let me go back to this. I said there's a reason I did this. The reason I did this today is I'm teaching a class Saturday. So that's Saturday, the 10th of September at the Rockler Maplewood store. That's Maplewood, Minnesota. So I'm doing a morning session on how to cut a waterfall edge, afternoon session on how to put in inlays like this. So that's what I was getting props ready for that class. That's why I did this one. Sean asked, what's the coolest thing you saw at IWF everyone should have in their shop? Thanks for doing this. Your content and advice has been much appreciated and an inspiration. Well, good. Thank you for that. Coolest thing, and it's always hard to say because there's a lot of stuff. One of the things I've known about since forever are match fit clamps from Micro Jig. So I'm leaving you alone a lot today, but I am coming back. So match fit clamps, if one were to cut a 1/2 inch 14-degree dovetail in a table, this will slip into that dovetail. So looking at their booth at IWF, they've got so much more now than just this clamp. They've got a huge array of items that play nice with that dovetail slot concept. So that is a crazy cool system. It's it's not a brand new product, but just the completeness of that as a system, just in that moment, really struck me. And I'm gonna do a project video with that. I'm gonna do an assembly table, maybe torsion box kind of concept or something. It'll be a video we shoot next year at this point. But that's really amazing. Just very interesting. So not a home hobbyist thing, but interesting and fun to try. Fuji has a spraying simulator that you put on goggles and then you have a spray gun in your hand and it looks, acts, behaves exactly like you're using a spray gun. If I stay in one spot too long, I get a drip. If I move too fast, it's too light. And then you're graded, you earn points based on how well you did. So they use that to teach people to spray without having to spray product. So that was very cool. And while we're talking about IWF a little bit, watch for this stuff from the show. So stuff from the show, one thing is I talked to a bunch of content creators when I was there and asked them, what's the coolest thing you saw at the show? So I think we had 12 people participate with this. Ethan Abramson, Ramon Valdez. I'm going to forget so many names. So look for that video. It's on WWGOA's social media. It's on the Facebook page. It may have been posted to the site. It was supposed to be. I don't actually know if it's up yet or not. But it's fun to see the variety of things that people talk about. One of the other guys, Michael, I can't remember his last name, he found an end grain veneers that were about 1 millimeter thick. So it's a cross section. It's a cookie like this that's been milled and made into veneer 1 millimeter thick. That sounds amazing. That was amazing. So anyway, look for that video. And then there are other product related videos that we shot with Triton, Shaper, Mullet is a dust collection system, Next Wave. So there's a bunch of stuff like that that's going to come your way. Katie found the video about tapering legs, and she's got that link. If there's an on-off switch on the router table ahead of the dead man switch, then you avoid the accidental scenario. I guess I'll stick with I would never put a dead man switch on the floor on a tool. I'd like to use my miter saw to cut an angle larger than 45 degrees, say 120. 120. There, I said 120. I'm such a smartass. How do I do that? So we'd have to mess with what exact angle you're trying to produce. But let's see if we can quickly walk through this. I keep meaning to do a video clip on this, and we just haven't shot it yet. But what one can do, oops, sorry. Let me get some scrappy scrap that's not Purple Heart. This will work. So what you can do is put a piece on your miter saw, clamp it in place, cut that at an angle, And the key is when that's clamped in place, now I got to think a second. When I bring another piece of wood up against that, oh, I'm going to look stupid because I can't remember how this plays out. But this is the concept, is I have a piece on there. Oh, then I come back to 90. I haven't thought about this for a while. And when I go against that cut piece, I can, let's see, that would give me a 45, but I can change that angle. And I think it's, I don't know, it's complementary or supplementary. I'm doing this on the fly and I know I'm not getting it right. So don't troll me on that. But there probably somebody else has done a video that covers that concept. But that's a way to do it, is throw that sacrificial piece on there, get a cut in that, and then you use that as a alternative fence to get a steeper angle than you can otherwise get. But look it up. Don't do what I just did there, because I wasn't doing it right. Brian asks, I recently switched my 10-inch DeWalt table saw to a 90-tooth Diablo blade. I have to say I'm really impressed with the finish. Been using for all cuts and woods, thicker or harder woods, I go slower. Why not go higher tooth finish most than time? I'm sure there are reasons, but the 90 tooth, I'm sure there are reasons, but the 90 tooth, but I'm not seeing any disadvantages yet. Wow. Well, so like I said, as a rule, as a general rule, when you're ripping solid wood, you need the big gullet to carry the big chips out. If you are successfully ripping solid wood with a 90 tooth blade, I'm surprised that's working, because that would be really a really small gullet. I mean, this is a 60, and the gullet on that is already pretty tiny. But it's another, like, if that works for you, cool. It's not generally recommended on rips to go higher than 40 teeth, but if it's working for your saw, cool. I bought some walnut oil at a grocery store. It's 100% walnut oil. I was wondering if it'd be good for cutting boards. I do not know. I would check with the manufacturer. Walnut oil is something I haven't used. So mineral oil was my go-to for a long time. I'm experimenting with some other products right now, but walnut oil is something I'm just not familiar with. Cindy says, I'm working on an ornate antique cedar chest. One of the legs is badly broken. It also extends into the body of the chest itself. There are missing pieces. Two options have been suggested: resin filler or complete restoration. Color match is challenging. What would you do with this otherwise beautiful cedar chest? I would find a really good furniture restorer like you, and I would drop it off there. This is so not my thing. Like, I'm sorry. And I don't mean to be flippant about it, but here in my shop, people call or stop in quite frequently asking me to do some kind of furniture restoration, and I've not done it. I just don't know. It's there are so many little idiosyncrasies, especially if it's any kind of an heirloom piece, if it's an antique, if it's all of the above. And there are so many places for me to go south on that. So I don't know. I have zero experience in that arena. Sorry. Jeff says, a little testimonial here. The pumpkin tray project is a breeze with George's instruction. I made a couple last year and then got orders for a few more. Thanks, George. So that's cool. So that's, again, if you weren't here when we started, there's a download available because Halloween's right around the corner for a pumpkin tray. So you can go to that, click download, and you'll be able to get that plan for free. So have a look at that and get it. I would do it now so you have it in plenty of time to make a few for Halloween. Steve says, do you do greenwood turning? And if so, how do you keep the wood from cracking? So yes, I pretty exclusively turn green wood. So there are a couple solutions for this. My friend Paul, also very avid bowl turner, turns green. For him, he turns and leaves a very thick wall, and I'll come back to that, and then lets it dry, and then comes back and finishes it. So coming back to that, the thickness of the wall is 10% of the diameter of the bowl. So a 10-inch bowl should be rough turned with a 1-inch thick wall. Put it in a brown paper bag, throw some shavings in there, let it dry, maybe 6 months. It'll probably distort a little bit, but probably won't crack, and then you can finish it. In my case, I don't have that kind of patience. I just turn start to finish, excuse me, while it's green. And I don't know, everything here, everything on this shelf behind me was turned green. There's a box elder bowl that was dripping wet green. Part of it is when you look at this, avoiding the pith of the tree if you can. The pith is the very center. The pith is what's most prone to crack. So if you can get a chunk of wood from the outer part of the tree, you're going to have less likelihood of cracking. Get the walls down fairly thin. So again, if you're doing what I'm doing, which is start to finish green wood, get those down to 3/8 or 1/4 inch. And again, because they're thin, they're going to be able to give a little bit, move a little bit. So you're going to be less prone to cracking. It's going to go egg shaped. This one is a little bit oblong. And I'm cool with that. Like anybody can turn a round bowl. My bowls are egg shaped. So I see that as a feature benefit. And if it gets a little bit of a crack in it, I'm okay with that. Like I've been turning forever. I've been turning greenwood probably since the mid 80s. I've had 1 or 2 bowls that have cracked to a point where I'm like, okay, I can't give that to somebody. But for the most part, if it develops some spider web type cracks in it, I think that's just another feature. And I'm okay with that. Ken says, small table, 13 inches wide. My design has the rails running parallel to the wood grain. How to attach and allow expansion. It's in red oak. So 13 inches wide. So it's probably going to expand and contract between 1/8 and 1/4 inch from summer to winter. So what's connecting the legs? You know what I mean? What's connecting the legs across the grain? I'm not seeing rails are parallel to the grain. So if you're not putting anything on there perpendicular to the grain, then it'll be able to expand and contract, and you're golden, because it'll, like, if. So if we're looking at the bottom of a tabletop, it's like a scale drawing of your 13-inch table. And the grain's this way. And then you do a leg and a leg and a rail. These rails could be screwed and glued to the bottom of the table. And this whole assembly is going to move, expand, and contract with the table, with the solid wood. It's only if you do something cross grain that you would have to allow that. You'd have to accommodate that movement. So I might be missing the concept on your design, but if it looks like that, it's not an issue. Roger has a tip: use a grill brick to clean cast iron tabletops, and they'll be like new. That's interesting. It's like a really big Scotch-Brite, right? Derek says, once in a while I give my clamps a coat of paste wax, which stops the glue from sticking. That's a good idea. John, I'm on a fixed income, can't afford to buy just whatever. Our tools from Festool, Woodpecker, etc. are really so much better as to justify the high prices. So a good approach to that is to look at tool tests that have been objectively done. WWGOA, we don't do tool tests. Wood Magazine still does. I don't know about, I think Woodworker's Journal still does, still does. And the benefit to that is you've got an objective person, an objective editor, looking at a lot of different tools across typically a variety of price points. And they are objectively picking out features, characteristics, good, bad, good, bad. Usually, like what we used to do at American Woodworker, is we would say best. And that's like, regardless of cost, this is the best tool in the group. Then we would also do, I think that was editor's choice. Then we would do something that implied good economics. And I can't remember what we called that. But tool tests are still doing that in most cases, where there's another product that's like, we're in more of a mid-range price point, and this is a tool that satisfies most of the needs, and here's good, bad, and the ugly about this. So that's a good way to look at, when you're shopping sanders and you want to know, should I get a Festool, a Mirka, a Bosch, a Milwaukee, or whatever, that looking at a tool test like that is a good way to go. Doug asks, have you found any finish that will help maintain bright colors of woods like Paduc, Red Heart, Bloodwood? And no. And I don't know, with some woods, it's an oxygenation thing. So just being exposed to air makes them darken. With others, it's a UV thing. So if you use the finish with a UV inhibitor, would that keep, like that bowl I had out, which is over there now, that is box elder. And when I turned it, it had red in it that was as red as blood. And that's gone now. And it's a problem with, that's a very cool attribute of box elder, that it has those red stripes. It's like the only good attribute. But the bad news is they fade over time. So I don't know what, I don't have a finish suggestion that would prevent that. Ann says, should I follow a math formula for French cleats, or just draw the 45-degree angle and cut my strips? Yeah, I don't know where in that we would use math. So I've only done it once. All I did is I cut like 2-inch wide plywood strips on the table saw with the table saw blade at 45 degrees. And I cut 11 billion of those. And then some of those strips got fastened in, it's on my finishing bench right over there. Some of those strips got fastened to the bench, and then others got fastened to the back of whatever I was hanging. And it's just the same strip. So there wasn't any math or drawing. It was just a function of setting the table saw blade to 45. Bob asks, what happens to your Tight Bond banner? I wonder if it's Bob in Ohio asking that question. I forgot to put it up. So I did at the open, and I'll say it again now, I did thank Tight Bond for keeping this free for everybody who watches, but I am guilty of, in just much running around to get ready for my Saturday class and then pulling this together for the live, I forgot to put the banner over the door. Steve asks, will a super glue activator spray make the final joint weaker than one without activator? You just have to be careful about the volume of activator you're using. If you overdo it, let's see if we can make this happen. There, the fly zapper just got a fly. That's that. Here in my shop, when you hear that pop sound, there are 2 bug zappers. It's the easiest way to deal with. I have my doors open all the time, and the easiest way to deal with the fly population is a bug zapper. Okay, so let's see. Of course, when I accidentally do this, it happens with some frequency when I want to do it. So there's some CA glue. A healthy bead of that. So in the world of very informal science experiment, I'm not going to put any activator on that end. I'm going to put a little bit in the middle. And then I'm going to mask that off a little with this. And I'm going to overdo. So what can happen if you overdo the activator is the glue crystallizes. If you've ever used this with CA glue and you find that that glue all gets white and gross, kind of like, I don't know, like hard sugar, almost sugar that's been exposed to humidity, it's because you use too much activator, and that'll weaken the joint. So if you use the activator correctly, you're fine. But if you know, if you're in a little is good, so more is better kind of a category, no, it's not. That's where it'll go south on you. All right, so a couple things here while we're closing up. One, again, thanks to Typebond for underwriting this and keeping it free, so you all get to watch free. Two, Halloween is coming. So we've got a pretty cool little project, which is a pumpkin tray. And there's a banner where that's available. And just click on the download there. I'm just going to make sure that's what it says. Yeah, it just says download now. And when you click on that, you'll be able to get access to that free plan. And then if you're in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area, this Saturday, I'm teaching at the Maplewood, Minnesota Rockler store. I think the first class is 9:30. It's right around there, 9:30 or 10. Look on their website. They'll know. I'm doing waterfall edges. I'll come back to that. I'm doing how to cut a waterfall edge in the morning, how to put in inlays like this bow tie in the afternoon. And then they're handing out some kind of a coupon for people who attend. I don't know what that part's about, but there's some kind of a discount coupon that they're going to do. This stuff, part of the reason we're grabbing those topics, this is fallout from the book I wrote, which is about working with live edge slabs. So they'll have that book available in the store as well. So with the CA glue, where am I? Look at right there, how it's kind of kerfluated. So that's from being a little overzealous. Walter asks, any word on when CNC classes might start again? So I appreciate people's patience on this with classes here in my shop. And a lot of people have been asking about it. So COVID, I didn't do any. I'm ready to offer them again now. And what has happened is I've been booked to do quite a bit of teaching outside of my shop. So that was Mark Adams School last spring. Rockler's coming up, another event I'll talk about in a second. So at this point, it will be not until after Christmas until I come back to doing classes in here again. So the two real popular ones are cabinet making and the CNC class. And then bowl turning is in kind of a third or fourth place there as well. So you can look for that. You can watch for those classes after Christmas. The other event I'm going to be at, which is coming up pretty fast, in fact, before we do our next live, October 8th, 9th, and 10th, I will be at Maker Camp, which is just outside of Albany, New York. Catskill Mountain Maker Camp. It's a crazy cool event. It's not just woodworking. There are forges set up. Last year, I cast some pewter there that somebody else was doing. I'll be teaching CNC stuff at that event, but there are 11 billion things going on. It's a cool venue. It's a really beautiful spot of the world. Upstate New York is a really beautiful part of the world, and so that's where I'm going to be in that weekend in October. All right, 5:01. Thanks so much for joining, and watch for the Facebook Lives, which are every 2 weeks or so. Watch for this live, which will be coming again in October. Other than that, Katie and Max, you can punch us out.